Hey everybody, Shwazy here, and in today's video, I'm super excited because we're going to be reviewing 5 different types of vehicles. A luxury vehicle, a crossover, a pickup truck, a sports car, and an off-roader. And no, I'm not talking 5 different vehicles. I'm talking one vehicle that does it all, and I'm talking the 2022 Rivian R1T. Yes, believe it or not, the Rivian R1T is 5 different vehicles in one. It is arguably one of the most capable vehicles on the market today. And in today's video, I have the honor to review it and talk about over 30 plus cool, fun, and interesting features specific to this vehicle. There's so much to talk about with this vehicle that let's get right into it. So starting off with the first, in no particular order, let's discuss styling. Now, one of the main advantages of this vehicle over maybe some of the other triangular shaped competitors, if you know what I'm talking about, is the fact that this vehicle actually looks like a pickup truck. Starting off with the front, you have these really cool daytime running lights. So if you guys actually notice, this is not the headlight unit. This is simply just a light bar that extends from the passenger to the driver's side and has a really cool look to it. As a matter of fact, if you're charging this vehicle, it will actually light up green, but most of the other time it's just lit up white and it looks really cool. Gives the front end a really distinctive style to it. And the same applies to these oval shaped lights at the front as well. These are actually not the headlights. The headlights are actually located in this little housing over here. You've got about 4 different lights over here, but the oval shape is along the same lines as the light bar. It is just a daytime running light. And what's nice about that is there is no mistaking this vehicle for anything else. You can immediately tell that it's a Rivian when it's driving down the road. Now, coming over to the side, it really isn't that much different than any other pickup truck. I mean, you've got the same similar shape as any other truck. You've got a nice little spoiler up there and overall good looking shape. And then to the back, again, kind of more conservative, similar to the front end. You just have this light bar that extends across. You've got just your kind of a fake looking skid plate, and then if you do remove this piece down here, you will actually open up your tow hitch. Coming into the inside, it's a little bit more reminiscent of other electric vehicles in the market. So obviously, I'm not going to always talk about Tesla in this video, but that is the major competitor or the biggest brand in the electric vehicle market, and so I have to bring it up. But the inside does look a little similar to a Tesla, and I think that's just because most vehicles nowadays look kind of similar to Tesla with the large screens and the touchscreen setup and a more minimalistic design. But I think this one actually looks a little bit better, in my opinion, than maybe the Tesla Model Y and the Model 3. I think those ones are a little bit too simplistic on the inside. This one does have a dual screen setup, and then the seats are absolutely gorgeous. And the back row is no exception to that. Same cool styling. You've got Rivian written over here on the seat itself, and you've got a touchscreen for your climate control. Otherwise, the styling is something we have to mention because that is one of the main selling points of this vehicle, with it looking more like a conventional pickup truck. Now, in case you're wondering what this particular spec is, this is actually a first edition model. So there's a limited quantity of these vehicles, and they're completely sold out on the website, and they're still manufacturing these, I believe, and customers are still taking delivery. There's currently 2 trim options available for a Rivian R1T. You've got the Adventure trim, which all launch editions were, and then you've got the Explore trim, which is kind of the more entry-level, basic trim level of the Rivian. But that's it. You just get those 2 options for trim levels. Now, just so you know, this exterior color is called Midnight, and the interior that we just looked at is called Black Mountain. So this is a black on black vehicle, and it looks really stunning. I think any vehicle in black looks fantastic. It's just when it comes to maintenance, it's a little bit difficult, so you may have to think twice before picking this color. And another staple of the launch edition, which I want to discuss, is the Powertrain, which, well, there really isn't one, but it's obviously an electric battery platform. And in the launch edition version, you have quad motors. That means 1 electric motor on every single wheel. And that offers several advantages, especially when you take it off-road or when you're trying to drive this on the track, should you do so in a larger than mid-sized pickup truck. But that is up to you. Rivian is also in the process of producing a dual motor setup, which will also be all-wheel drive, but you'll have a motor up front and a motor at the back instead of 1 at each wheel. And that should save costs a little bit, but it does come with the sacrifice of a a little less performance on and off-road. But keep that in mind, if you're looking for a more affordable option, you can choose the dual motor, which should be out, I believe, next year or the year after that. Now, let's talk about pricing, since I've teased that for quite a while now. So the pricing has changed over the last couple years. Currently, pricing starts at $67,500 for the base dual motor standard battery pack. Now, you can actually take that all the way up to about $95,000 if you go for the Adventure trim, which is essentially the same trim level as this first edition, and you opt for the quad motor and the max battery pack, which is not yet available but will be produced here in the next couple years. And we'll talk about range and all of that in the next section, but I did want to mention pricing because it is not cheap, but at the same time, you get a lot with this vehicle. So since I've teased you with the range figures, let's talk about range and charging network. So first off, that's a pretty cool way to open it. You actually just touch these three little lines over here, and that will open and close the charging door with this cool switchblade-like action to it. I really like how that looks, and it lights up around here so that you know where to plug it in, which if it wasn't obvious before. Anyways, talking about charging network, obviously Rivian offers an in-house charging network, which costs you a little bit extra, but allows you to be able to charge your vehicle in your home. And as you can see, here's what the light bar looks like with the lights turned on. But it allows you to charge in the home with about 25 miles of range for every hour of charge, which that should be pretty sufficient. If you're parking your car and leaving it overnight, maybe 8, 9, 10 hours, that should give you almost up to 80, 90%. Now, if you do happen to take this on a road trip, you're going to want to charge it up to 100%. And the owner of the vehicle actually tells me that there are some Electrify America stations that if nobody is parked in that station and you pick the super fast charging, you can get almost up to 300 miles of range in one single hour. So you can go grab a bite to eat and then you come back and, well, your car's gonna be fully charged. You can go another potentially 300 miles. So what if you don't happen to have an Electrify America station with super fast charging? Well, Rivian is actually building thousands of level 2 chargers throughout the country. And those chargers charge your vehicle about the same rate as the charger at home. It's about 25 miles per hour. Now, if you happen to be so lucky that you're in one of Rivian's Adventure network, that is Rivian's super fast chargers. And they actually are able to charge this vehicle 140 miles in 20 minutes. So essentially you could get 300 miles of range in less than an hour, similar to those Electrify America supercharger stations that I was mentioning. But this Rivian Adventure network is free to Rivian owners. Now, in case you're wondering about costs, the owner tells me that when they charge this vehicle essentially from 0 to 300, it costs them about $40. And that obviously depends on the electricity price and where you're parking it and how remote the area is, but just keep that in mind. It does take a little bit less to fill this vehicle up with electricity than with today's gas prices. Okay, now let's talk about range in general, because I'm sure you're curious, if you're buying an electric vehicle, how much can you get in terms of driving? So the standard battery that comes on the base entry-level Rivian can actually get you about 260 miles. Now, this particular vehicle, being the first edition, being the Adventure trim with the larger battery pack at launch, this one can get you, on paper, 314 miles. Now, I spoke with the owner about this. You know, how realistic is those mileage? Because there are some other electric competitors out there that maybe overquote what figures you can actually get. I'm not going to name names because I think a lot of manufacturers do this. So as a point of reference, the owner of the vehicle told me that when they were driving from St. George to Cedar City, which if you guys are familiar with Utah, it's a pretty uphill climb to get between those two cities. He said that he was getting about 68% of what Rivian was saying they would get for this vehicle in terms of range. At the same time, he was telling me that when he passed Cedar City going to Beaver, he actually regained some of that mileage and it ended up being about a 1-to-1 ratio. So what that means is it really does depend on a lot of different conditions. When he was driving from Cedar City, there was quite a few headwinds coming his way, and he was going a little bit above highway speeds because the speed limit is a little bit higher in those regions than what you would typically drive in your regular freeways. You're gonna impact your range if you're driving above a certain mile per hour, and if you're facing a lot of extreme conditions like a lot of heat or a lot of wind. At the same time, when he was going downhill coming from that city, he was able to regain some of that mileage. Now, TFL actually did a very good video regarding range because they took this vehicle uphill and then back downhill, and they were only able to gain a couple miles coming downhill. But coming from the owner, he was able to recoup some of that, and he thinks that overall what the computer tells you inside of the vehicle is pretty close 1-to-1. But you can most certainly get probably around 300 miles of range when you fill this vehicle up with this large battery. Now, Rivian also offers something called the Max battery, which is going to be coming out, I think, here in the next year or two, and that's going to be able to get you upwards of 400 miles on a single charge. That's a much more reasonable number when you're thinking about towing, which this vehicle can do a lot of, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Let's talk about sizing, because this is not your regular mid-size pickup truck, and it's also not a full size. It's actually right in between the two. So as a good comparison, this vehicle is a little bit larger than the Ford Ranger, but smaller than the F-150. This is actually 217 inches long. It's actually longer than a Ford Expedition, which is a 3-row large size SUV. Now, in case you're wondering about weight, for those of you that make fun of my 2020 Hellcat, which weighs like a boat, this thing actually weighs 7,100 pounds. As comparison, this is about 500 pounds more than an H2 Hummer. Now, obviously that has to do with the fact that batteries and electric motors, they're not light. But the benefit with that is the fact that since the battery and the motors are very low to the ground, you have a low center of gravity, which helps it with some of that performance and that storage space that you get inside the cabin. Okay, since I briefly mentioned performance, let's talk about it. And you know, I teased in the beginning saying that today we're reviewing a sports car, and I'm not being facetious. I'm seriously talking about this vehicle, because let's talk about the specs. Acceleration 0 to 60, Rivian says you can get there in 3 seconds with this quad motor setup. Now, if you end up getting the dual motor setup because it's a little bit more cost effective, that's not slow by any means either. It's 4 seconds 0 to 60. And for anybody who's driven in an electric vehicle, you'll know that when it says 4 seconds, they mean 4 seconds, and it's consistent every single time. Now, that being said, Car and Driver did test this vehicle, and I think they got anywhere from 3 to 3.3 or 3.5, so it's somewhere in that range, but regardless, you're wickedly quick. There is no other real vehicle out there at this type of price range, aside from maybe a C8 Corvette, that can get you the 0 to 60 time of the Rivian R1T. So how do you get all that horsepower? Well, because of the quad motor, you have actually 835 horsepower and 908 pound-feet of torque in this mid-size pickup truck. Now, if you choose the dual motor, they haven't announced the final specifications, but you'll have about 600 horsepower and 600 pound-feet of torque. Now, the owner does tell me that when in performance mode, because this vehicle does have 8 different driving modes, the range does come down a little bit because you're driving a little bit more spirited. In that mode, you're likely going to take the 314 miles of range on paper down to about 260. So keep that in mind before you race the Lamborghini or the Corvette standing next to you at the stoplight. Now, I also teased in the beginning that this is an off-road vehicle, and I wasn't joking about that either. If you click on this off-road mode, it actually gives you, first of all, a warning talking about, hey, you know, you can only use this off-road, but it gives you several different options, from just your regular auto mode to a rock crawl to a rally mode and a dirt mode. And you also have different features here for your brake regen and your suspension height. So at the highest setting, this vehicle has just shy, or according to the screen, 15 inches of ground clearance for you to be able to rock crawl over almost anything. Now, we just put it into the highest setting on the center display, and you can physically see this vehicle increasing in height and the air compressor on the inside actually lifting up this suspension. And it is extremely noticeable. One thing to mention in the off-road capability, there's no hanging differential, there's no, driveline components hanging out from the bottom for you to be able to damage when you're off-roading or rock crawling. And look, this vehicle is still growing in height. It actually lifts the back end first, and then it lifts the front end after that. And it is a noticeable difference. I'll let it continue while I talk about some of the off-road specifications of this vehicle. Now, first of all, Rivian says you can get up to 3 feet of water fording in this vehicle. That's 36 inches. And I gotta say, that seems really high. That's one of the main advantages of not really having like an air intake port with a conventional internal combustion engine. For those of you that are potentially worried about hitting a rock and puncturing one of the battery cells underneath the vehicle, well, Rivian actually says they reinforce the underbody with high-strength steel, alloyed aluminum, and carbon fiber composite. So it's supposed to be able to distribute any impact that happens to that underside evenly throughout the bottom, so you're not puncturing any important components under the vehicle. In terms of specs, if you're wondering for off-roading, you have 35.5 inches of approach angle. You've actually got 26.4 inches in breakover angle, and then you've got 30 inches in departure angle. And as you can see, it finally lifted up to its final height. And that is a tall looking vehicle. Looks like you put some sort of lift on it. Now, one advantage of having a quad motor setup is you don't actually need lockers. If you think about it, you essentially have an engine at every single wheel. It allows you to be able to transfer the power wherever you need it when you're doing aggressive off-roading. And so that is a really big advantage when you're off-roading electric vehicles, especially when they have a quad motor setup. Now, with that, I should mention that when off-roading, you're likely not going to get 300 miles of range. You're probably going to drop to maybe half of that is my guess, just because you're putting a lot of torque to those wheels, and obviously your electric motor is going to be draining a lot more energy. Now, another thing I want to mention in regards to off-roading is the Rivian comes with these all-terrain wheels. Now, you can get sport wheels, but these ones particularly are the 20-inch, to be exact, they're 275 millimeter all-terrain Pirellis, and these are extremely capable. You can see they actually have quite a bit of grooves over here on the side, which should help with when you're, rock crawling or off-roading, to be able to get a little bit of traction and not damage maybe the wheel itself by having that knobbier tire. Now, one last feature I want to talk about that's not yet available yet, but will potentially come with a software update because the capability is already built into the vehicle, is something that Rivian calls the tank turn. What that does is it actually alternates the direction of travel for the driver and passenger side, allowing you to literally turn in a 360-degree circle in the same position. So you could be standing right here and I can turn this vehicle with a tank turn and I would all of a sudden be facing the front end. Okay, I also haven't forgotten the fact that this is a pickup truck, like I mentioned in the beginning. As you can see, it is an electronic assist open. So you push this button located over here at the top and it automatically opens the tailgate. That's the only way to open it. You can open it on the inside, I believe, and with a key, but I'm just saying if you're outside of the vehicle, that's the best way to open it. And just so you're aware, this is a 4.5 foot bed. Now, let me open up this tonneau cover, which is actually automatic on this launch edition version. And like I mentioned, it is 4.5 feet when the tailgate is lifted and upwards of 7 feet when this tailgate is down. Now, that is a little bit of a smaller bed than, say, your conventional mid-size pickup truck. You're usually getting about 5.5 feet on like a standard F-150, and you can go up from there. Now, one complaint I do have is with everything being so automatic, you can't actually push this button again to raise the liftgate. You actually have to physically lift it up. And the issue with that is, you get your fingerprints all over this surface. There's not really a place. And as you can see, I think this was me doing it earlier. You can see fingerprints on this black, beautiful paint. And I think it makes more sense because there are other trucks on the market that have an automatic raise and lower versus just an automatic lowering. One nice item to mention back here is you have this interesting plastic trim piece that allows you to actually not have any type of ridge between the tailgate and the body of the vehicle, because as you can see, it's actually a pretty large gap between that space. So if you were to have this be kind of a traditional tailgate, you're going to have probably about 6 inches of space to be able to roll something into the back, but they thought ahead. They put this trim piece over here, which allows you to gain access into that back. Now, with this being a pickup truck, obviously we have to talk about towing capacity and payload. Now, and this vehicle's towing capacity is actually one of its strengths. Regardless of what Rivian you get 11,000 pounds of towing capacity. That's a really sizable figure. That's very comparable to a full-size pickup truck like the F-150 or the Ram 1500. Now, in terms of payload, it's also pretty capable as well. You're talking 1,760 pounds, which is also comparable depending on what trim and spec you pick of an F-150. That being said, obviously, the elephant in the room is the fact that your range is going to go down if you're towing with this vehicle. You're probably looking at 150 if you're towing up to 11,000 pounds. So keep that in mind if you're buying this vehicle for its truck purposes. It's a little bit limited in terms of range. The nice thing with this air ride suspension is that it has a self-leveling feature. So if you hook up a very heavy trailer or you put a lot of payload in the back, this vehicle will self-level so you don't get that Carolina squat that most of us want to try to avoid. Okay, so it's a sports car, it's an off-roader, and it's a pickup truck. What else is it? Well, it's also a crossover in a way. Now, you may be wondering why I'm kneeling down near the passenger side, and that is because I want to talk about ride height and ability to get in and out of the vehicle, because that is one of the main benefits of a crossover. At its lowest setting, this vehicle can actually go down about 6 to 6.5 inches from its highest 15-inch off-road setting, which lands you right around 8.5 inches of ground clearance or ride height to get into the vehicle. That's actually pretty standard and very comparable to just your entry-level Toyota RAV4, which is the best-selling small crossover on the market. So if you're trying to convince your wife about having a practical vehicle, well, you can get your mother-in-law in and out of the vehicle just as easy as any other crossover. Well, in case you don't agree with me and you say, well, this is obviously not a crossover, another staple of a crossover is storage room. Coming over to the Frunk, it's a very large space, and there's some added practicality which we'll talk about here. One thing to mention is the Rivian logo up here. It's kind of a nice touch. The one, I guess, disadvantage compared to the F-150 Lightning is the Lightning actually opens up the entire grille. As a result of this one just lifting up the hood, you're gonna have to lift things a little bit higher to load them into this Frunk. One cool feature about this is this floor that actually folds up magnetically and gives you a little bit more space. So by folding it back and just clipping it to that back over here, it gives you a little bit additional depth into the front end. And this is where you can hide your charging cable. This is for your gear guard, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then if you have something that you just want to keep out of plain sight, you close this back up and nobody really knows that the floor of the Frunk actually opens up lower. You do also have this cigarette lighter 12-volt adapter over here, which is nice, and a light so that you can actually see what's down here when it's dark. And you have your netting over here to be able to store some groceries or apples or something so it doesn't roll around in the Frunk. Now, again, this is power operated, so all you do is push that same button left of the front camera and the hood closes just like that. Now, if the Frunk is not enough space for your granola bars, you actually have obviously a center arm console as with every car, but it's a pretty deep compartment. What's interesting to point out here is it is power operated. So you push a button and you have this cool like utilitarian sound to it. And in here, you do have a pretty good amount of space. You do have some USB ports down there as well. That's additional storage. Now, one thing I do want to point out, you don't have a glove compartment, and I'm not sure why. So that is a sacrifice, but luckily you have plenty of more storage space down over here. This is a rubberized floor over here. It's a little bit raised as well. So if you have something rolling around, it's not going to fly out. Now, you may be wondering, where are the cup holders? Because, well, it doesn't look like this vehicle has any, but this is an American vehicle. It has to have cup holders. Well, if you push this button over here, it actually slides out 2 cup holders, and there's some more in the back as well. I believe up front, those are the only 2 cup holders, but it's nice that you can slide them out of the way, give it a more minimalistic look to the interior. Okay, but where are you going to put your Birkenstock shoes? Well, there's spaces back here as well. Obviously, you have this expandable storage compartment in the back door, just like you do in the front, but coming back here, you do have this kind of cool design to this map pocket located back here. And what's nice is up here, you actually have a hook so that you could potentially hang like an iPad or some sort of screen, and you have a USB port back here to be able to plug in. Now, while you're constantly having devices charging while you're watching them. And back here, you do have a little bit more storage as well. Putting down this center console, you do have another very narrow, but still nonetheless useful compartment over here. And that pretty much finishes off. Wait a minute. What is this? Oh, you thought I forgot? Well, there's actually a little bit more storage space once we get behind this cabin. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I kind of hinted at this at the beginning of the video, but you have this weird looking line that extends across the body. What could this possibly be? Well, by pushing this button, you grab this area. You got to do it a little bit quickly from what the owner tells me. If you take a little bit of time, it kind of locks up. And wow, this is a huge compartment. Let me open up the other side and show you what this looks like. Now, for those of you that want to store your skis, this is a perfect area to be able to load whatever you want and hide it out of plain sight. Trucks have been around for decades, almost 100 years, if not more than that. And nobody has really had this opportunity to create an innovative gear tunnel like you see here. Now, you do also have a 12-volt power adapter located over here, so you can still plug in and charge some devices, and the same on the other side. And this is really a magnificent use of space. Now, the nice thing about this door is you can actually stand on it. This can support up to 250 pounds. And so if you need to load something onto the roof, or you just want to, sit at a campsite and there's not enough chairs laying around, then you can just sit on this and enjoy some s'mores or a burger while sitting on your Rivian. One thing I noticed while closing this doors is this door panel actually has paint protection coating on it, so that when you're opening and closing it, you don't scratch it with your fingers or your hands. That is a nice touch from Rivian to be able to protect the surface of the paint while you're opening and closing that door. And as the 1990s infomercials will go, but wait, there's more. Yes, there's more storage space underneath this vehicle. There's this little latch over here, and you may be wondering what it's for. Well, if you pull on it, it actually opens up this storage compartment. It's pretty hidden underneath the vehicle. And that really has to do with the fact that these batteries are located so low to the ground and that the motors for this quad motor vehicle are so small that you have this additional space that you wouldn't traditionally have with just your regular pickup truck. The only other vehicle that I think I know of that has this type of space is a Honda Ridgeline. This is a nice space for actually a full-size spare tire, but if you don't opt for that feature, you can actually use this as a storage compartment, or you can use this as a cooler. So if you're tailgating, you can fill this up with some drinks, fill it up with ice, and there's actually a drain plug located right down here. So when you're done, you can open it up and drain it out. Now, with all of this stuff combined, the storage space, according to Rivian, is 62 cubic feet. And that includes the 11 cubic feet in that gear tunnel that you would never find in any other vehicle. So all in all, that is a pretty amazing amount of storage space for a pickup truck. Now, the last thing that this vehicle is a luxury vehicle. And I'm not lying about that either. Let's take a look at all the nice use of materials. Now, first off, up here, this is soft touch material. It's actually a vegan leather material throughout the entire cabin. We'll show the seats here in a minute that I touched on earlier, but typically this is where manufacturers cut costs. They put this as hard touch plastic. You got more hard touch plastic back here. This vehicle does not have any of that type of cost cutting. Soft touch materials here. Even this surface over here, which is kind of a hard touch plastic, it's covered in that vegan leather. So that's unlike a lot of other luxury cars that I've reviewed where they do cut costs down here. Over here, you have the soft touch material. You've got nice window switches. The door handle is really unique and has this gunmetal appearance to it. And this is natural grain ash wood. Yes, that's not a fake material that they're putting in. That is actually true wood material. And even though it's probably not entirely environmentally friendly, I'm sure Rivian has some sort of trees that they planted in exchange for the trees that they've cut down. But regardless, you know what? I think it looks really cool. And it really does give off a luxury vibe to it. Now, coming into the seats, I mentioned these earlier. This is the level of detail that you would see on a luxury vehicle. You've got Rivian written right over here in case you forgot looking at the outside. You've got this perforated leather, and these are heated and ventilated seats, and you also get a heated steering wheel. Everything you touch is soft touch, including stuff you don't touch. Like up here, this is a soft touch material, no hard touch plastics. The only place I can really see hard touch plastics is up here, where you're typically not really touching the surface ever, and this is just for durability's sake. Up here you have this headliner, which almost looks like Alcantara or, you know, leather or suede. It is actually 100% recycled microfiber. Coming to the bottom here in this adventure trim, you actually have Chilowich floor mats. And no, Chilowich is not something you order at Subway. It is a woven type of material that you oftentimes find in houses. Now, if you still don't believe me that with this nice of an interior, this is not a luxury vehicle, we got to talk about this panoramic moonroof. Now, this is actually standard regardless of what trim level or what Rivian you get. And it's really nice to have this feature, especially if you're doing overlanding or off-roading, which this vehicle is kind of made to do. You can look up at the stars and have this beautiful landscape above you. It makes the back seats feel a little bit less cramped than just a typical roof. Now, there is no cover for this roof, so keep that in mind. The forces of nature are entering this vehicle through that direct sunlight, but the owner tells me that it blocks out about 99.9% of UV rays, so you're probably never going to get a sunburn in this vehicle, but you may have to keep the vehicle a little bit cooler, even though the fact that this is tinted, but that may also impact some of the range that you have in this vehicle when you're driving in hot weather. Now, the next feature that makes this a luxury vehicle is the 19-speaker Meridian sound system, and the speakers are everywhere. There's 19 speakers in this small of a cabin. There's some above the doors over here on the passenger side and the driver's side. There's some actually located in the seats themselves, as you can see over here. And there's actually a subwoofer located right around back here. So a fantastic sound system that I've witnessed in other Range Rovers, and it does a really good job in its placement in this vehicle. Okay, now that I have certainly convinced you that this is a little bit of everything, let's talk about some of the fun and cool features that I wasn't able to fit in those other categories. The first has to do with this key, which actually looks just like a carabiner. What's nice about this is there's 4 ways to actually enter this vehicle. You can either use your phone, you can use this carabiner, you can use a credit card, or you can actually get a bracelet that will act as a key to enter inside of the vehicle. Now, what's cool is when you unlock this vehicle, the door handles actually pop out, and it's a little bit different to Tesla Model 3. We have to kind of push it in and open it. This one opens up, and then when you close it and lock the vehicle, the door handles will go back into their place. Now, I'm not sure if you heard that, but when you lock this vehicle, it actually makes this Tweety Bird sound to it. And it's very unique because I've never heard that from any other vehicle in the industry. Now, I briefly mentioned these crossbars earlier, but they actually serve a double purpose. These crossbars are an accessory that you buy in addition to the vehicle, but they not only mount on this surface over here, and you can snap them out by pushing this button over here, but you can actually mount them to the roof of the vehicle. You have these connection ports across the roof, and this crossbar actually slides out in order to fit the placement on the roof. So these are adjustable inside and out, which is a cool feature because then you can actually potentially attach 4 of these crossbars to be able to attach some cargo to the roof and to the truck bed. Now, if you do purchase these crossbars, you can also purchase for $3,100 a 3-person tent that attaches to the back of the truck bed and allows you to get into the vehicle and house up to 3 people when you're overlanding in your Rivian. And if you feel like you want to spend a little bit more money on your Rivian, you can actually purchase a fold-out kitchen that will actually slide out of the Rivian, open up to a grill, some utensils, some really necessary overlanding gear, which makes this vehicle even more capable when you're taking it off-road. But that option comes at a sacrifice of $6,750. So if you choose to do that, you can entertain your guests while you're off-roading and overlanding, but you might have to make your guests bring their own meat. The next fun feature to discuss is you have a flashlight in your Rivian. With the push of this button, the flashlight slides out, and you've got a flashlight that's always fully charged because it's connected to the vehicle. So whenever you need it, you have it. Really cool feature to have, especially if you're going off-roading when it's starting to get dark. Another important feature when entertaining guests is some audio. And just because your Rivian has a nice sound system doesn't mean you can't take it outdoors. You have this additional speaker here that automatically connects to the Bluetooth that's inside the vehicle, and so you can take your entertainment outside of the Rivian onto a campsite. Now, another use of very clever packaging is, well, you may have noticed earlier when I opened up this gear tunnel, there's this storage compartment over here, and well, what's located in this bag? Well, this is actually the hose for your air compressor that comes in-house inside of this vehicle. In the truck bed, if you open up that little flap, you actually have an air compressor where you can set the amount of air you want and pump up anything you want, essentially, from the tires on your vehicle to maybe the tires on a bicycle or UTV that you're using off-road. Another smart feature back here, you may have noticed these 2 little plastic pieces down below underneath the air compressor. That has to do with something called the gear guard. Now, I showed you that little rope underneath the frunk, and what that is it's a cable that's cut resistant that you plug into one end of this compartment over here on the left, and then you wire that rope all the way through your gadgets, maybe through a bicycle, and then you plug the other end back into the other side. And what that does is it essentially locks your gear or guards your gear in the back of the vehicle or outside of the vehicle. It's a pretty long rope. And what happens is if somebody comes up and starts tampering with that rope and pulling on it, there's sensors over here, and it automatically alerts you on your phone and also turns on the camera located back here and monitors what's going on with your cargo. Another very smart feature that's useful to have when you take this vehicle off-roading, because oftentimes you have to leave your valuables in the vehicle, and that makes it challenging because unfortunately people steal, and this vehicle tries to prevent that. Since we showed you the driver's side, I have to show you the passenger side, which also has a very smart compartment over here. This is actually a first aid kit, which is really necessary to have if you're off-roading or overlanding. And even further, in the passenger side, you have this more comprehensive or robust safety kit that actually comes with a shovel in here, among a lot of other features that are very necessary to have. If you are overlanding and you do get injured, you're going to want that first aid kit, and you're going to be happy that your Rivian came with that. Okay, now let's take this vehicle for a ride and see if that over 800 horsepower really talks the talk. Okay, setting off in the Rivian R1T. One of the first things I want to talk about is how quiet it is inside of the cabin. You know, I can almost hear my voice a little too well because it's echoing inside of the cabin because it's so quiet. They did a really good job with the insulation, making it a little bit more premium, more reminiscent of a luxury vehicle. And again, I'm trying to convince you this is also a luxury car. Now, I do want to point out that the regen braking is pretty aggressive on this vehicle. You really only get, see, I didn't even push the brake pedal once and the vehicle came to a stop. There's really only 2 options on this vehicle. There's standard regen and there's high regen. And high regen is a little too extreme because I'm going to show you what that feels like. I mean, it's almost slamming on the brakes. So that is something to get used to. When I test drove the Mustang Mach-E, that vehicle had various levels of regen, and the lowest level was more reminiscent of just a regular internal combustion engine. So get used to that when you're driving this vehicle. Another odd thing is the turn signal makes a pretty odd noise. It's kind of a quirky feature of the interior. Okay, we're gonna do a little bit of a pull here just to see what it feels like. Wow, I mean, this vehicle gets to the speed limit in the blink of an eye. It's incredibly fast. And before we get on the main road and I do kind of a bigger pull over there, I want to talk about the safety features. As you can see on the screen here, it's showing you all the vehicles around you, similar to what a Tesla does. But the one thing I really like about the Rivian is you don't have to get upcharged to get some of these safety features. Regardless of what Rivian you get, it comes standard with all of the safety features that the company has to offer. And it essentially does full self-driving with the caveat of it has to be a pre-mapped road or highway. So it's not going to work everywhere, but when it does work, it works very well, and it's able to change lanes and accelerate and decelerate just like a Tesla. Okay, let's do a quick pull here. Wow. Oh, okay. I mean, this is dangerously quick. You know, you can get yourself into trouble very easily in the Rivian. And I will say, you know, I test drove and did a review on the Mustang Mach-E GT Performance Edition, and this vehicle is quicker than that. And on paper, it is too. It's about half a second quicker, but I want to say this vehicle is probably a full second quicker than that one. And that one was already insanely quick. So, you know, regardless of what trim level you pick, you're gonna get motion sick inducing amounts of power in the Rivian. It's still kind of hard to get used to the regenerative braking. Now, we're gonna let this vehicle get a little bit further ahead and stomp it. It's just instant torque, instant acceleration. This vehicle really does it all. I want to talk about the ride quality. It's really comfortable. There's two different ride quality modes. There's soft and then there's stiff. And the stiff is more obviously for spirited driving. And keep in mind, all of this acceleration you're seeing on the screen is in the all-purpose mode. This isn't sport mode. I'm not doing launch control. This is just a natural acceleration of this vehicle. And the last thing I want to mention is interior cabin size. This vehicle I think is perfectly sized. It's not as small as a Ranger, and it almost feels as big as an F-150, but it's still a little bit smaller. So it's not the most compact. That's what you're buying this vehicle for. You're gonna have to look somewhere else, but I think it is plenty of size for like a family of four. Now let's talk about the warranty, because that's a very important thing to keep in mind when buying a vehicle from a new manufacturer. The warranty on this vehicle is 5 years, 60,000 mile bumper to bumper. But that being said, you do have an 8-year, 175,000 mile warranty on the battery. So if something goes wrong, Rivian will replace it. And speaking of replacements, how does that work since they don't really have a dealer network or service stations anywhere nearby, at least not here in Utah? They do have locations located throughout the country, and they have something similar to service advisors that will actually come out and make repairs on the vehicle. And the owner of this vehicle tells me that they're already planning to come out and fix a couple things that he's noticed. And let's touch on build quality. One thing he's mentioned is there is a little bit of an issue with the weather stripping located over here on the side. It actually ends up kind of opening up at high speeds and making a whistling noise when he's driving. So that is something they're going to come out to repair. Another thing he's mentioned is the tonneau cover does make a noise sometimes when it's coming back and locking into its final position. I'm going to try to replicate it right now and see if it works. So it didn't make a noise that moment, but sporadically it does make like this locking noise that it shouldn't really sound like that. And so they're coming out to check that. And the last thing they're coming out to check is when he opens up this storage compartment underneath the truck bed, when you're closing it, you have to apply quite a bit of pressure, almost as if you're slamming it shut, as if you're kind of breaking it just in order for it to close. So those are just a few things that he's noticed in his several months of ownership. But overall, I am actually personally very impressed with the build quality of this vehicle. You know, when Tesla came out, they had their own share of issues with the Model 3 and the body panels being hammered into place and all of that. And that was a manufacturer that already had lots of vehicles on the road. The Rivian, I mean, this is one of probably the first 1,000 or so, I'm going to assume, that are built out of that factory. And for it to have so few issues issues, and the fact that my Bronco even has issues that are very similar to this, and that's a manufacturer that's existed over 100 years, is really a testament to the build quality of this vehicle. And overall, I think it's a really great vehicle if you are in the market for a sports car, luxury car, crossover, pickup truck, and off-roader. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video as much as I did. I had a blast reviewing this vehicle. I was very excited to do so because this is one of the hottest vehicles on the market today. And if you find one of these used on the market, you're probably paying a pretty hefty premium to be able to drive this down the road. If this is your first time stopping by, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos. Stuff like this comes on a weekly basis, so stay tuned for that. Also find me on all of the social media down in the description below. And as always, everybody, I hope you stay schwazy, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day.